The After the Affair podcast with me, Luke Shillings, is here to help you process, decide, and move forward on purpose following infidelity. Together, we'll explore what's required to rebuild trust not only in yourself, but also with others. Whether you stay or leave, I can help. And no matter what your story, there will be something here for you. Let's go. Hello and welcome to the After the Affair podcast. I'm your host Luke Shillings and you're listening to episode number 155, I think. Probably ought to check that. Anyway, how are you all? In this week's episode I wanted to go back to basics. I want to help somebody who's been betrayed to really figure out what it is they need to do to go forward. Now, I'm not going to structure this in a truly step-by-step way like I have done in previous episodes. I'm thinking in particular back to episode number 74 and 75, the 8 ways to heal. Now, of course, they are absolutely well worth following if you want that structured process, but I really want to just go back and talk about my own journey and how I moved through this process myself. Now, it was some years ago now when I discovered that my wife was having an affair, and at that particular point in time, I'd really wanted to try and reconcile, to try and save the marriage, because that was in part because of the time and the investment that I'd put into the relationship up until that point. In part because I thought I had a pretty good idea of what the future held, and now that plan had kind of been derailed somewhat and I wasn't quite ready to let go of it. In part because I loved my wife and she was also my best friend, in all honesty. But, you know, I had some conditions that, or boundaries, should we say, that I wanted to put in place so that if we did consider reconciliation at that point, there needed to be a few things that we agreed on. And as it happened, we couldn't agree on those specific things. So ultimately that led to separation and then divorce. That left me in a place where I chose to move out of the family home. The reasons for this were mostly logistical. It was best for the children, it was the easiest solution, it was sort of the path of least resistance for everybody involved, let's put it that way. I have spoken about this a little bit more in other places, but for the sake of today, it's not particularly relevant. The next phase was really trying to come to grips with this new reality, this new perspective, I suppose. Like I'd said, I sort of had this future laid out, at least to some extent. And then all of a sudden, I couldn't really predict what was going to happen the next day. I didn't know how I was going to feel. My emotions were all over the place. It was up and then down. And then, you know, there'd be moments where I felt kind of like I had things under control. And then the next thing I'd be breaking down in tears and having to, you know, pull over in the lay-by on the way to work or whatever it was I was doing at that particular time. I withdrew. I tended to, you know, try and keep myself away. I wasn't communicating as much with my close friends and family. I felt in part a little bit like a burden, but also like there was always this kind of elephant in the room where there was this clear thing that was going on in my life at that point. And of course, the people who cared about me wanted to look after me. They wanted to make sure I was okay. They wanted to check in and offer support, just like a loving friend or family member would do. And of course that was lovely, and I did like that. But I remember particularly thinking at the time that it was as though everybody else knew or projected what it was they thought I should do and what I thought I should feel. And it wasn't really in an overpowering way. Maybe it was a couple of my friends that were perhaps a bit more firmer in their opinions than others, but generally speaking, it always came from a loving, caring place. But the reality was, what I was hearing externally, whether that be from friends or family, or whether it was from what I was reading online or what society had taught me in the run-up to betrayal, the reality was it's not necessarily how I felt. I felt conflicted. It was like, you know, I speak about this pendulum that swings from the light and to the dark, and It's never really remained static. It's always in this constant swinging, and in those early days it swings quite quickly and quite far, to the point where you can't really stabilize. If I tell you what, it's a little bit like the weather in the UK. And I think one of the reasons that people in the Brits get a bad rap for always talking about the weather is because it's so inconsistent. It never stays the same long enough for us to actually grasp it, to make sense of it. And so therefore it's always something to talk about. And I guess that in this context, it was a similar kind of experience. Like I was feeling extremely emotionally unstable in some moments. And then, then there was glimmers of hope and freedom and a future. And then there was feelings of loss and hurt. And then there were feelings of love and desire and everything in between, and that's before I add on the layers of the more like the anger, the frustration, the pain, why was I so stupid? How could she do that to me? It was a friend of ours that was the affair partner. And so it was like this double betrayal as well. So really complicated, conflicting emotions, which were incredibly difficult to really grasp. So, and I was aware of this. I noticed this, and I started initially just by speaking to one particular friend, a close friend who ended up being really supportive to me during that time. And, I can't really thank him enough. But it helped, first of all, offload what it was I was thinking and feeling in what seemed to me a completely non-judgmental situation, even though I would often say things quite forcefully in the sense that, I should do this or I should do that, or she shouldn't get away with this and shouldn't get away with that, and he was always very neutral in his responses and always was really good at sort of grounding me in that moment. And it was sort of throughout that process I realized just how much of what I was experiencing was just this chaotic narrative in my mind. So I started writing. Initially it was perhaps a little bit, more like journaling, I suppose. It was more like a story. Some of that was quite graphic and quite detailed and very emotional. As time went by, I started to recognize the similarity and the patterns of what I was saying, and started to really trim it down, I suppose. It was like I began to edit what it was that I was saying, not to change it, but just to highlight what was really true for me. Like, what were the facts of my situation? What were the things that I could control? What were my circumstances in that moment? Because once I became clear on those, I could kind of put those bits to one side, because a lot of them were things that I couldn't change. It was things that had happened, things that had been said, decisions that had been made, and I couldn't really undo them. A lot of them were in the past, and really all I could deal with what I had with me there and then in the moment. Like, what was I feeling? What decisions do I have to make today? What decisions do I need to potentially think about tomorrow? But really anything beyond that wasn't really worth giving my attention to, because, well, as I'd recently discovered, my belief of how good I was at predicting the future was, well, it was shattered. It turns out I wasn't so good at predicting the future. So didn't really feel I had too much confidence or evidence to suggest that it was worthwhile in trying to predict the future from this point forward. And instead I kind of came to peace with that. It's like, and actually, sort of as years have gone by, that's one of the things that I really quite like about life, is that you don't know what happens tomorrow. And yeah, okay, sometimes there can be scary things that happen and upsetting things that happen, but there can also be some incredible things that happen. Different people that you meet, opportunities that come your way, the times where you believe you didn't or you weren't capable of doing something, and yet you just commit to it anyway. Like, irrespective of all of the inner voices or the noise that you keep hear, that little part of you that tells you you're not good enough, or you can't do it, or you're wrong, or you're broken and not worthy in some way. Like, just no, forget all that. Do it anyway, because you might surprise yourself. And I've made lots of decisions, lots and lots of decisions, personally, financially, business, of course, and I have had very little guarantee of the outcome of any of them. And I've been okay with that. And it's being okay with that that's really created the difference and the change in my life. It's meant that I've been able to rebuild a relationship. It means that I've been able to build a business. I've changed my whole life structure in so many ways. I've become a better father, and I've been able to help so many wonderful people who have also been through some really difficult situations. And of course, there are lots of tools and tactics and skills that I've picked up along the way, which I've then been able to pass on to the people that I help and support. But ultimately, it was about being comfortable with the discomfort that I was in. It was about letting go of the idea that I could predict the future when I just couldn't. And it was about getting clear on what I could control and what I could not. So I want you to know that. I want you to know it's okay to feel everything you're feeling. Like, the temptations to want to try and just get rid of the pain or get rid of the cause of the pain. But what if that isn't the goal? What if the goal is just to get comfortable with it so that it doesn't have the power it used to have? What if it is just about getting clear on what your situation is, like right now, today, in this moment? Not what it was like 6 months ago, not what it was like last week, not what you think it's going to be like tomorrow or in a year's time, but what is it like now? What decisions can you make today that your future self would be proud of? Your future self would stand there in that point in the future and look back and say, Luke, you made a good decision that day. And it's not about it being right or wrong or better or worse. It's simply that you made a decision and you stuck with it and you gave it chance. You believed in yourself because you spent so much time not trusting your own judgment. But the only way we can start to really rebuild trust in our own judgment is by making decisions and then following it through. And accepting that if it doesn't go the way we planned, it doesn't mean that we've failed. It just means that we've learned one new way how not to do it. So be kind to yourself. Notice what you can control. Pay attention to what you're feeling. If you have somebody that you can communicate with who is non-judgmental, then take advantage of them. Put your thoughts down on paper, not to judge them, not to use them to beat yourself up or ridicule yourself, but simply so that you can look back at them objectively and know that they cannot hurt you. And if you feel like that's still too much or you still can't quite manage that, then seek some support. Reach out. If this is the first time you're here, then welcome. And if you've been listening to me for a little while, then you already know. You know where I am. I can help you. I work with people just like you all the time, and people change their lives. I can't guarantee the outcome, but that's not my goal. That path is yours, not mine, but I would be more than willing to come alongside you in your journey. Thank you for listening. I'll talk to you all next week. Signing off, Luke.